Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to have opportunity also to teach to different other places because my main occupation is design educator. So I'm really like focused on education. This is something which is very important. And as you already introduced me, I'm teaching at the Department of Visual Communication Design at Arts Academy in Split, where I'm leading design and futures MA module. So we have a master module which is dealing with some of these topics. So this is kind of my place where I'm really situating my work. And during this presentation, I will talk about design, speculations, and future, but also I will show some case studies, our projects, uh, which is showing how we are dealing with these kind of topics. And I'm coming from Split in Croatia, which is a town on the Adriatic coast, and this notion is very much important in the stuff what we are doing here. I'm starting with this slide. This is how my future as a teen growing in Yugoslavia at that time in the 1980s looks like. And this was kind of even like a second peak of the Cold War time, not very stable time, but our future, or my future at that time was looking quite bright, shiny. We just couldn't wait for the next day, what the future is going to bring to us. But unfortunately, the future doesn't look anymore like this. It looks like also as some of the images you showed here. And today, we are afraid of the future. We are stressed with all this crisis or polycrisis which is happening around us, and we have lost our faith or hope for the better future. This kind of process, with, which is called also as a kind of slow cancellation of the future, started in the second part of the 20th century, and our future has been slowly colonialized by the dominant economic model. And sadly, I would say that we have lost our ability to imagine alternatives, what is possible, what is probable, and what is desirable future. And design as one of the drivers of the modernism, since its rapid growth during the last century, mostly played this uncritical role, supporting to industry and to application of the technology. And also with the globalization and the new technology, big data, automatization, Internet of Things, smart city, nano biotechnologies, AI now provided great possibilities in the context of which design is a fundamental element of new products. A new product system as service developed in such context had dramatic consequences on the society, and in short time have shocked economic, legal, and labor system in many cities and countries all over the world. Also, unfortunately, design had and has its role in the building of so-called Anthropocene or Capitalocene time, which more than ever in human history open possibilities for the extreme catastrophic scenarios. But on the other hand, we have seen around us a new design competition focusing on different solutions for the biggest international problems. A number of designers believe that new disasters create new opportunities for the designers. At some point, it looked that designers were the only one capable of stopping this cycle of capitalism. But most of the time, bringing approaches that intending to resolve problems that have resulted from the technological developments with new innovations, and in most cases in design and production on another new technology. It's a kind of phenomena we describe as a so-called Western melancholy, in the process in which designers focus on the consequences of the current situation instead of dealing with the causes of particular problems. So we have like constantly new technology, we are producing constantly new technology or new design, which is trying to solve the problem which was resulted from the previous innovation technologies and design, which is working on this appliance of these innovations. We can see projects that carry this idea about genius, creative person or scientists who are only one who possess the necessary knowledge and wisdom and who are going to save, of course, via innovation technology, the planet from self-destruction. And if you look deeper, such colossal or mythic projects use the same rhetoric and ideology of the past centuries, as well terms like conquest, colonization, and so on and so on. And so this Western melancholy can be also observed in the mainstream Hollywood production. I like to use lots of examples from the pop culture because design is very much connected with the pop culture. For example, this is the blockbuster Geostorm from 2000, I think 17 or 18. At the beginning of the movie, we see the network of satellites around the planet against technology, which is controlling the climate change. And then something happened with the system, and the whole Earth is again in the problem. And Geostorm is just one of the many movies dealing with the climate change produced at the mainstream level during the last decades. I can find some of the list around. And where we have this human mythical hero, of course, it's always like white and male, scientist who saves the planet. And it is kind of concept which is broadly criticized by the science fiction writer Ursula Le Guin as a kind of techno-heroic future. And this imaginary of the future are not so unexpected. If you look into today education, which is based on this hyper-techno optimism, and this worldview is rooted in a number of dogmas. For example, that human evolved from the observer into creator, and then in the name of the progress and grow, he can change the environment. And the consequences of the human activities or our activities is going to be resolved anyway by means of science and technology, of course. Let's back a little bit to the history. Science fiction has always been a great inspiration with the design practice, with a long history of creating worlds or imaginary scenarios and characters inside these imaginary worlds in the future. However, this vision of future also serves as a tools in the hands of the big corporations in the realization of their preferable future, which are usually built around corporation technology. One of the best-known examples is It's a 1939 New York World Exhibition and General Motors presentation Futurama, which is presentation of how American city is going to look like in the 30 years in the future. And if you look this presentation from the 1939, in the 60s, it was pretty accurate view of the American city in the future, but the city which is going to be built around their technology, General Motors technology, car. And you can see the main elements of the city. It's a highway, it's a place for the cars, not the place for the people. Similar rhetorics, it's nowadays used by big corporations, mostly from the IT world, and keywords such as safety, optimization, efficiency, speed, and similar are used in the corporation visions of the future, built around their new technologies. And those visions of the future are entirely dehumanized. Mostly people are props for the technology in these kinds of the corporate futures we see on the daily basis. But luckily, if you look in the future scenarios presented in the film and TV production, they include criticism and offer much more fun. This is called TV series from my childhood, Twilight Zone, which stands as one of the most significant mainstream examples of the speculation about possible futures. And today we are witnessing a growing production of dystopian stories in the mainstream Western context. And this is something for your generation, Black Mirror, of course, and it was apparent that dystopian were back in the fashion in the last decade. Also, if you look dystopian literature, were also on the rise and is still on the rise, and recently reached the level of its golden era, the era of the Cold War time, when it was era of the biggest tension on the global level. Of course, there is no doubt about historical importance of dystopian fictions, which is serving as a kind of defense mechanism and assistance in recognizing the dark force in the future. But we should not forget that already we live in such scenarios. We can look at the example of Neuralink innovation or even metaverse, where Black Mirror references are obvious. Or especially if we look to the global south, which in the global south, which lives in such scenarios for many, many years, but also those living on the so-called periphery of the developed world, or periphery or the periphery of Europe. This popularity of dystopian future scenarios also implies certain dangers. It could let people understand catastrophic scenarios as unavoidable, which makes them passive instead of proactive. This is kind of phenomena we call a temporal loop, where domination of dystopian scenarios of the future have a direct impact on the present, stopping any possible radical improvement. So we live in the present when there is a global political situation, but also situation, if you look in the creative world, in the pop culture, which is all around. We see all this dystopia. For us, it's really hard to think about different future than the dystopian one, which is then returning back to the us. And such, sometimes I call it Netflixization of the future. It's a result of dystopian media production, but of course not just about the production, but also about demand from the public, which created the future which is linear, predictable. The future, the kind of future which we see now, it's really like dark and dystopian. And it's important to start thinking again about different, non-linear futures, non-centralized future. And this kind of dystopian thinking requires some kind of counterbalance, positive visions on the future. And in this context, as a reaction, in last 25, 30 years, designers started to practice different approaches to design, moving from this dominant perception and conventional design practices, rethinking the role of technology in our everyday lives, focusing on the implications rather than applications of the technology. So thinking about how speculating about these new technological as well social, economical, and political futures, and looking how this new technologies will change our life when it comes to our homes. What is going to happen when all this technology comes to our homes? What is going to happen when all this technology has been domesticated in our everyday life? And we can take an example of speculative design practice, which is one of the most visible examples of such new design practices, which expanding this critical practice to our imagination of diverse vision and possible future scenarios in the plural. It is roots in the so-called English critical design, introduced in late 90s by Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby, with their design practice and education activities at the London Royal College of Art. But if you look back to the future, it is basically roots in many avant-garde movements in design and art and architecture from the history, mostly in the Italian radical and design and architectural practice in the 60s and 70s, which at that time confronted the the high modernism as the dominant ideology of that time. And speculative practice is dealing with the notion, what is the preferable future, for whom is preferable, for corporation, for industry, for government, or for us. And also with this very, very important question, who owns the future? And it is related to the series of similar practices: critical design, design fiction, radical design, discursive design, traditional design, and so on and so on. It's really hard to put a straight line what is different between all these practices. They are all based on the critical approach, and also most of them, they are based on the future. This is kind of important thinking in this practice. And we see it as a kind of primary as attitude or position rather than traditionally defined design methodology. But we can still point some distinctive characteristic of the approach, and we can draw a basic framework of this practice. And since it continuously interacts with the other related practices, fields, and disciplines, it uses any methods and tools and approach that are accessible and appropriate at the given moment. And in this more than 20 years of history, practice which deals with design and speculation become very much in fashion. You can see around us there are more and more designers which embrace speculative and related design approaches in their everyday practice. More and more design studios producing their visions of the future technological scenarios, and more companies were employing designers to imagine future trends. For example, in Google, there is a department which is dealing with design fiction or design futures. And there is more and more mainstream conferences and exhibitions dedicated to the future and related to the speculative design. And we were witnessing a number of educational programs based on the speculative practice as a tool for changing the future. And for potential students, they were kind of very hype places for studying. However, speculative design were confronted with a strong criticism, which I'm going to summarize here. And the first is that it's separated from the real world. It's a practice which is most of the time just ends up in the galleries and academic spaces, and that is coming from a privileged Western position, mostly practiced in the Western world, and that looks for the salvation dystopian scenario. So that is not dealing with the present, but just looking at the kind of dystopia scenarios, kind of empty space for the creating new and better worlds. And after this introduction, I will situate our work, how we are doing, what is our reaction in this context. And from the early 2000s, we started building our approach from the really like beginning, and approach we name it maybe a little bit pretentious, also Mediterranean speculative approach, which is kind of a practice far away from the European urban and technological centers on the periphery of Europe. We see our place where we are living and practice and doing design and educating in design as a kind of periphery. Adriatic is a kind of periphery if you look like a whole European context. And the focus of our speculative practice is on implication of global topics in the local context. So how emergent technological, economical, social, political, environmental changes will impact the context of Adriatic part of the Europe. And this approach is resulted as a series of works, which is different projects, which are mostly based on our personal, emotional response to the changes which is happening around. The first project I'm showing today, it's a project from 2070s. It was focused on automatization, automation. Automation at that time was like a really huge, big topic on the global level, also in the design and architectural context. And we were dealing not with automation of the cars, but automation of the cruising sailboats, because we collected data around us in the Split Harbor Master Office, and we saw the number of the skippers, people who are driving, operating with the sailing boats, mostly for the tourists, were growing exponentially, and it was one of the most popular occupation. So we were really interested in how it will change the labor market, how it will change these related occupations. And this project brings the near future story about the last, so speculating about the near future story about the last skipper, about the guy who didn't want to automate his sailing boat, and about this idea of this once romantic and one of the most popular occupation, which come to extinction by the automated sailing boats. I will show you just one short trailer about this project, then I will explain you how we presented the project.
Bude interesantno ljudi. Mislim, to je kao postali interesant.
Umjesto ti putuješ po svijetu i upoznaš ljudi, ljudi dolaze se upoznavati s tebom i još dobiješ neku.
To je vrlo interesantno. Ovo zadnje.
Pa već danas postoji intencija da posada na pogotovo velikim trgovačkim brodovima zapravo samo razgleda radi elektronike, praktički elektronika upravlja brodom veći dio plovidbe od isplovljavanja do uplovljavanja u luku.
Osnovno moje mišljenje je da skipera ne može niko zamijeniti. Nijedan stroj, nijedan tehničko dostignuće. Nego tu uvijek mora biti presudan.
Pa za očekivati da bi eventualni ljudi na brodu samo mogli uživati u plovidbi dok bi cijeli posao za njih obavila elektronika.
Ne, meni to nije to. Ja mislim da to nije to.
Ne, toliko daleko ne možemo razmišljati. Mislim, skipper vjerojatno neće umriti. On će mora biti na brodu. On će mora biti, šta ja znam, na letilici. Danas, sutra, šta ja znam, neko će mora s tim. Ljudski faktor neće biti isključen. U nijukom slučaju.
Računalo se ne umara, računalo u proračunu ne griješi i računalo uvijek igra na sigurno. Čovjek je sklon i umaranju, ali čovjek je sklon i riskiranju, što računalo nikad neće biti. Kada bi računalo bilo dovoljno sigurno da se u nijednom trenutku neće doći do nekog poremećaja u radu računala, onda bi vjerojatno bilo sigurnije od ljudske posade i za očekivati je da na neke duge pruge da će računalo moći sigurnije upravljati brodom od čovjeka.
A mislim, osim toga, skiper, uz to što je skiper, ako ima malo afiniteta za neke druge stvari, kad je s gostima tipa skočiti umore, izvaditi pobotnicu i takve neke stvari, to je već to, niti jedan stroj neće moći napraviti.
Evo se i to broda automatizirala sa i Filomena. A šta ti fali ovako? Bolje ti je smjena, nije ti dosadno. A ne daj ja tebe nikome. Ko znaj da radi ova kamera. Biće me kapetanija gleda, evo ako me gleda, evo da vidimo da radi, evo izgleda da radi. Evo moramo voditi dnevnik, pratiti sve živo i zapisivati u dnevnik, jer to radi kapetanije moramo sve, jer oni gledaju, moramo to paziti, sve da bude tip top. Gdje su sad svi oni moji skiperi? To je u kancelarijama, uredima, glume menadžere, bukiraju, ukrcavaju putnike, gledaju im sigurnost, a makinje nam voze brode. Ili su snimi moj glas, ali nisam ja tija. Stroj može imat sva znanja, ali nema dušu kao i ja.
Okay, the first time we showed this work was at Vienna Biennale as a part of exhibition, how we will work or how it's going to be like our work in the future. And we have presented as a kind of anthropological archive of video archive about like lost occupation from the past. So we have this on the first video, we have this like documentary we recorded with the scientists and the skippers where we see these two different opinions about like this occupation, about this very like deterministic one, and also the view from the skipper about this humanistic part of this occupation. And on the right, we see this fictional part. It was with our actor, which is actually skipper, but he acting here the last man standing, the last Mediterranean skipper who never accepted to automatize his work. Also, we had this the model. We have this boat, which is the boat how it's used to look like before the automatization, and we had some of the documentary materials like photos of the skippers with their the people, the tourists who were like cruising with them during their journeys. And for us was important because we had different stakeholders included in this design process together with us. And this project raised intensive discussion both with the public and the expert. This was published in one of the biggest local magazine, which is dealing with the sea and the sailing. And for all our projects, it's important that we communicate with the broad audience. It's not focused on the art, the design, and architectural public. The next project is from 2018. It's focused on the climate changes in Adriatic Sea, and at that year, Adriatic Sea achieved the highest sea temperature ever, and also the highest air temperature ever. Unfortunately, during the 2018s, we had even like higher the sea and the air temperature, and it's and these projects intended to provide possible alternative scenarios to expected extreme climate futures, offering alternative scenarios to prepare us for the possible post-apocalyptic Adriatic. But also, we wanted to offer concrete tools, techniques, and mechanisms to help individuals and communities in rebuilding their lives after disaster, to provide a new hope in a new beginning. And Split, our city, used to be very during the 20th century. Split used to be very important industrial center, mostly known for its large shipyard. But through the transition in the end of the last and the first quarter of this century, it became a city with economy entirely relied on the tourism. So basically, we are living in a mono-economical city when everything is relied on the tourism. And our story, fictional, speculative story, is situated in 2055, second half of the 21st century, when global climate changes resulted in extreme changes of life and economic conditions in the eastern part of Adriatic. And slowly with this kind of disaster, climate disaster, tourism as the most important economic sector disappeared completely. Migration has started with the collapse of the tourism. A number of citizens fled toward the inland and northern part of the Europe. So in our future, those who stayed tried to use sea level rising and the penetration of the seawater inside the old historical city core as a kind of opportunity for the future, as a new hope. Historical city center are becoming a place for the new forms of food production. So in our scenario, the center ancient Roman square in city becomes one of the city pools for the new mariculture, for extremely resistant sea organisms. So we started investigation in the local context in the collaboration with the Institute of Sea Studies and Fishery. For us, it's very important for every project to collaborate with the local expert, a scientist, and we work together on this background scenario. And also, we carried research together to find a resistant organism. What kind of organism will be resistant of such extreme climate changes? And we designed this setup, a kind of mariculture with algae, small shrimps, and the sea anemones, which forms elements of a kind of food chain or cycle. And we cultivated algae by using minerals and light, and then algae serves as a food for the brine shrimps, really small shrimps, and which we use as a food for the sea anemones. And after 1 month, this setup was firstly done at the Institute of Sea Study and Ocean and Sea Studies Institute in Split. And after 1 month, we achieved growth of all the species. And then we transfer all this in a gallery space to communicate with the broader audience. And also we call the chefs from the local cooks association as partners, and they prepared and demonstrated new food potentials of the mariculture of near future, using sea anemones as a kind of main ingredients. And they cooked or prepared at the exhibition opening a sea anemone risotto. Because sea anemone, it's not kind of common food in this part of the Adriatic, not even on the whole Mediterranean. There are some small places where people use it, but it's not kind of common food for now, but it's extremely resistant organism. And during the exhibition, we also invited the experts from the institutes. In the gallery, I organized educational workshop for the students and high school pupils about these practical aspects of cultivation of marine organism for the food and other production. And also we had the workshop with the small kids about the life after disaster, what is going to happen with the city when the sea level rise extremely in the future. So we have some of these ideas from the kids about this future. We can see also this like house with the legs and stuff like this. I will show you just a few minutes video from this project. So this is the city square used for this production. Okay, as a kind of outcome, we published do-it-yourself guide for building your mariculture in the future, so everyone could reconstruct this kind of mariculture in the future using this like a small manual. And the last project I'm showing you today, it's again, of course, dealing with the city of Split. As I said, a city which, after the period of aggressive deindustrialization in the beginning of this century, found itself in an even more aggressive apartmanization, where the population of the city historical center has been decreased drastically, changed the city identity, reconstructed the city, making the city as a kind of city only for tourists. And this project reflects the present of the city, which is happening 5 years after the Life After Tourism project, the project I just showed before, which is even more torn between unplanned tourism and pressure by the climate changes, extremely hot and dry summers and different storms, which is happening like more than ever, and which is stronger than ever. And the city has fallen apart communally and infrastructurally, where neighborhoods have been transformed into apartment dormitories of disorganized tourism. You can see this is a place where you can put the keys for the tourist who is coming here, and most of the houses are basically just Airbnb places. And also was inspired by the French sea explorer Jacques Cousteau, which was a kind of mythical hero of high modernism. And this is the photo when he visited Split in the 1977. This photo was one of my friends gave me a photo because he's on this photo. And in his speculation, he created in the 1960, he presented the so-called Homo aquaticus as a man who, through scientific and technological extension, which is going to be developed over the next 50 years, will live and survive in the sea again. So this was his vision of the beginning, the first or second decade of the 21st century, the period where we are living in. And in his case, resulted in the construction of experimental underwater habitats, in which divers stayed for the several days. This is one near the Marseille in France, and you can see how it looks like inside. But basically, if you look from the other side, this Cousteau speculation was based on this anthropocentric relation with the nature, in which technology played the primary role in achieving a human supremacy or colonialization of the sea. And in our project, our speculations satirize or making this irony about the present, where in our place, a large number of residents rent out their apartment in the summer as a private accommodation. So they rent their flats when they're living during the other part of the year, and spending the summer in vacation homes, country houses, even garages, or with the parents or relatives in the crowded apartments. So they go to their parents, spending the summer there, and rent their apartments during the summer. Even something what we found it even more interesting as a kind of weak signal, some kind of stuff which is like weak signal now, but will become something very important in the future. Some of them even rent their apartments, but spending time on their boats in the small city communal ports. Lots of people have small boats, like kind of small vacation boats, which is really like, which is not used for any kind of touristical purpose. It's just for them to, sail around islands or something like this. But now, they're spending like summer on their boats, not going on the vacation or sailing around islands, but staying in the city marinas, going to the work every day, going back and sleeping in the boats. In meantime, renting their apartment for the touristic purposes. And in our project, we started with anticipation of the first submarine settlements in the near future. So moving from this like sleeping boats to even like submarine settlement during the summer, during this touristic season. In order to bring this speculation closer to reality, we collaborated with the experts from the Department of Naval Architecture at University of Split, again with the experts, and we have developed conceptual drawings of the community habitats of the future, and also which could be launched into the underwater of the Split Communal Port. And also in cooperation with the experts on the Institute of Oceanography and Fisheries, we discussed about food possibilities of using marine plankton or biomass as a food in this specific location. We also speculated about this possible creation of a new community, a community that would retain part of the almost lost identity of the city, but also build a new specific local identity of the future, which are places of new community resilience, not as the places of new utopian beginnings, but as the places of transition from the present to the new different societies, communities of hope, and communities of the future. You can see on the map where this kind of future settlement would be launched under the sea. And during this project, we opened questions about possible infrastructure system of this kind of habitat, what legal and regulatory concepts of such collective practice would allow these seabeds to be treated as exclusively as a common good. And basically in this project, we see new utopia in the front of us, but such utopia is in the same time a complete dystopia. An image of the collapse of the city collapse under the touristification and climate change, a community that had the privilege of living in how we call our city the Pearl of Adriatic, which seeks its last salvation in these claustrophobic underwater habitats and their dark corridors. This project was presented as a kind of exhibition in the local art, the most important art gallery in Split. You can see some of these images about this. You can see in the gallery there is a lines the size of this habitat of the real size of the habitat. Okay, and during this exhibition, we also organize a workshop with the kids dealing with this topic, which we present in the gallery. And our focus was always on this, how to transfer our projects into education. So also from 2004, we are running a series of multidisciplinary international workshops dealing with these contemporary design practices and new design practices. And we constantly transfer our approach as our tools, methods, and techniques to the students. And basically, in order to critically reflect educational practice in this area, since we see that still a lot of mainstream design practice and education is still stuck in this last century modernistic notion of design. And from 2008, we started the speculative edu project, which was in the 2.5 years dealing and mapping with the speculative design landscape to bring a kind of overview of the contemporary design education. And we conducted more than 50 interviews with a number of practitioners and educators and hosted many international educational activities. This was summer school in Rome in 2018, and our topic was not urban but neo-rural future, how these rural futures would look like in the future. And through all these activities during the project, we have opened a series of new questions, just questions. And also we realized that we're already living in what may look like a dystopian future. From the name of the project was Life After Disaster is becoming Life with Disaster. And where speculation became reality, where all fears and threats returned to us. When first time in the history, the two big crises are connected or intervened together: nuclear threat of the reborn nuclear threat of the Cold War and the climate crisis of the 21st century, where we are living in the time of so-called post-apocalyptic melancholy, polycrisis, broken future, and so on, where the future has been taken from us. And where there are no any more techno-heroic futures or techno-heroic heroes from this Ursula Le Guin critiques. And if you look, what is the most visible legacy of the speculative design practice? So we see a number of projects dealing with these dystopian futures before it's happened, including different kinds of disaster, diseases, wars, climate disaster, totalitarian state, technological dystopians, and so on. And there is arguments around us from the speculative design community or fiction community. We have told you didn't prepare, you haven't done anything to avoid this. And we have to be very critical, since those views basically leads to despair, where dystopia becomes normality. And if we go back to this beginning of this lecture, speculative design appeared as a result of this dissatisfaction with the state of design and design education over many years. And we hope that has created a small foundation for design to move forward. And I think for us it's very important to look from the education, because education it's extremely important here, and is as a reflection of 20 or 25 years of dealing with the practice. As a part of this project I mentioned before, we published a book, Our Overview of the Practice, with reflection on the past with chosen historical references, present with selected case studies with employed approaches, tools, and methods, and about future paths with a critical view on the speculative practice. And at the end of the book, we summarize a few challenges that aim to improve the way in which teach, perform, and evaluate speculative design projects. And in this context, which is here mostly global, we see our approach, what we are doing here is split as a kind of continuation of our activities on the local level or periphery, from the bottom up, with the local people in collaboration and participation with them, to establish more connection with the similar-minded movements and projects on the national, regional, and the global level, looking for possible global or more broader transformation in the society. And last few slides, and this is something which has really happened recently. On this line, I was invited to curate, and with my team, we organize event in Slovenia, in Nova Gorica, as a part of European Capital of Culture in September, when we have dealt with all these questions I'm talking about here, and about hope and the future. And to conclude, I think hope is not a naive project of better future, not even a distant utopia, but I think it's something cultivated through the critical dialogue, collective practice, and everyday work of care. And it's rooted in the tangible everyday design activities, starting from our local context. And this discussion is documented in this new book. I think we're going to have some free copies of this book to order from the organizers from the Museum of Architecture and Design in Slovenia, which is quite nice book with lots of interesting contribution inside. And that's it. Thank you. So I'm open for discussion, questions, and comments.